everyone, my name is Beta. Welcome to my YouTube channel. So I am a first year PhD student and I wanted to make this video for those of you who are considering graduate school or getting a PhD. Having been through the process just last year, I wanted to basically share my experiences with you, talk about kind of my background, what motivated me to get a PhD and whether that's something that would be right for you, as well as discuss a general timeline when you're applying to PhDs, when you should get started and what you should expect as you go through the process. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so first I want to talk about what is a PhD program and is it right for you? So a PhD program allows you to receive a PhD or a Doctor of Philosophy. This is basically the highest academic degree in a given field. Typically, this is achieved in a 5 to 7 year time range for this training program. Usually about 5.5 years, I would say, is the average, though it depends on the person and the circumstances and what your personal goals are. Most PhD programs, at least the science ones in the United States, are fully funded, basically meaning that the program covers your tuition and provides a stipend in addition to that. Some programs may also provide health insurance or other benefits as well. So I like to think of this as you are a student, but you are in some ways an employee. They are paying you for your time, albeit not very much. The goal of a PhD is to basically train you to become an independent researcher, someone who can design their own experiments, analyze their data, and answer new scientific questions. So if you're really curious, if you want to be able to answer the unsolvable questions and to really go beyond what is known and add to that knowledge base, then I would say that, a PhD is probably your best bet on what you want to do. General timelines for a PhD, so as I mentioned, it can take 5 to 7 years to complete. While this can vary based on program, this is typically the outline I've seen for most programs, and this is what my program follows as well. The first 2.5 years are basically a mixture of classes and research. And then at the end of your second year, you basically have these qualification exams. These go over your project, the general knowledge that you should have, and basically everything you've learned those first 2 years, you should know. Different programs do these in different ways. My program has an oral qualification exam, so basically you stand up and you talk and you draw things out. After you pass that exam, you become officially a PhD candidate. Following the passing of your qualifications exams, when you become a PhD candidate, you will just continue with your research. You will publish your work, share your work, present it, network, meet new people. And then at the end, when you're kind of reaching that 5 to 6 year mark, you have a thesis defense where you present your work, you answer some questions, and at the end of that, hopefully you will have your PhD. But in addition to the research and the classes, there are some other parts of the PhD that, at least to my knowledge, a majority of programs seem to also put an emphasis on. So there is a lot of reading of primary literature. You should be able to read a lot of papers, be up to date with the field, know what's kind of going on. There is also a emphasis on mentorship, whether that is to have an undergraduate researcher under your mentorship or teaching, TAing. A lot of programs tend to require at least 1 semester of teaching requirements for their PhD students. There's also a lot of collaboration, and this can vary based on the program and the values of that program, but oftentimes you will work with people in other labs, you will work with other mentors, and you will learn from people because not everybody knows everything. Like, yes, your mentor, your primary investigator is the person you will go to the most often, but there are other people like your committee, your cohort, other people in the program who are older that you can also rely on, collaborate with, ask questions from. And all of these, I think, really cultivate in you learning and training to be truly a good enriched scientist. You will also develop skills in scientific writing, scientific presentation and community, as well as grant writing, asking for money from the government, all of those wonderful things. So given all of these parts of a PhD, what the timeline looks like, and what the expectations and goals are, if you want to know whether or not this is right for you, it's important to ask yourself whether these things align with your professional goals and your passions. Why I chose a PhD was primarily because I love research, and I could see it being my career. And I reached the point with my classes where I kept asking questions and my professors would be like, well, that's actually not fully known yet. We don't entirely know that. And then I was like, well, I want to know that. And so that kind of pushed me to want to pursue a degree that tries to answer that tries to advance the field and hopefully make a contribution while doing that. So really ask yourself what you see yourself doing in the future down the line, what gets you the most excited, whether you're willing to put in the work and effort to reach those goals, because PhDs are not easy. All right, so transitioning to the second part of this video, I want to talk about my background, who I am, and what I've done to basically be accepted into a program. So I completed my undergraduate education at Georgia Tech, majoring in biochemistry. I was originally pre-med, but this changed as I began delving into research. I started doing research the summer after my sophomore year, so you could argue this was a lot later than many people begin doing research. But ever since that summer, I basically just did research until the end of my undergraduate career. I've worked in 3 different labs during my time in undergrad. The first one was in REU. That was my first ever research experience. Then I worked for a year in a biomedical engineering lab looking at cancer cells. For my last research experience, I worked in a biochemistry lab, also at Georgia Tech, for the final year of my degree. During this time, I've contributed to 2 publications. I've presented 1 poster, and I haven't really done much else. Other than that, I didn't really attend seminars or do anything super crazy. I also did TA throughout undergrad. I started the second semester of my sophomore year and basically continued TAing throughout my time in undergrad. So this was very helpful, I think, because in addition to my research, I was able to build connections and also build my confidence as someone who can teach, who can communicate science. And I think that's very valuable. And one more thing I want to add onto this is I never took the GRE. So the GRE is an exam that some programs require and others do not. Personally, I didn't want to do it, and so I didn't. I only looked at programs that didn't require the GRE, and I was completely fine. So this isn't a requirement, and I think a lot of programs are starting to shift focused away from the GRE. So I do think having a strong background in research is really non-negotiable. They want to see that you've done the lab work, you have experience in research, because a PhD is primarily research. So you can't really go into a PhD having never been in a lab, having never even experienced or touched a pipette before. I would say that a majority of programs probably do require that you have some level of research experience. It's a bonus if you have publications. Strong letters of rec, I think, are incredibly valuable. You want people to be able to speak strongly on your behalf. And so building those connections throughout undergrad, I think, are very valuable. I think it's also very important to have a clear interest. You don't need to know your exact project, but kind of having a clear path of like, this is what I want to do. This is, my story and why I want to be in this specific PhD program. I think is very strong. You don't want to just be like, I'm applying to PhDs for the heck of it. That's not going to be a strong application. All right. So for this next part of the video, I want to talk about the timeline of applications. I started looking at programs in like mid-June, which I think is probably the average time to start looking at programs. I know people that started looking all the way in January before. I know the people that started looking like in September. All of those are fine, but I think that because I started looking so early, I really got to learn more about myself as I looked into these programs, and it gave me time to realize all of these nuances and small things that maybe if I had started looking later, it could have been overwhelming or overlooked. And really, it was at this point that I even realized I wanted to do cancer research. Because going into it, I knew I wanted to do a medicine-related PhD, but I had this background in biochemistry. I'd only briefly worked at a cancer researching lab, and that was more of the biomedical engineering side of it. I, was interested in cancer, but it wasn't like I absolutely have to do cancer research. But even just looking at the programs, answering the questions, beginning to jot down like, well, why do I want this program? It really helped me narrow down like, oh, I want cancer research. Like, that's what I want to do. That's what I'm truly passionate about. Also in mid-June, as I was starting to look at these programs, I started to rank the different programs. So as I mentioned, I had this document. On that document, I would have factors like location, the stipend, the values, some of the top ranking faculty that I thought were interesting and I could see myself working with. In August, I began to write my statement of purpose, which I used to apply to 7 different programs. So these statement of purpose is basically a statement of my purpose. What have I done? What is my history? And why do I want to be in this program? I basically reused my statement of purpose for all 7 of my applications. Some applications require you to just submit a statement of purpose going over these general criteria. Other program applications have little text boxes asking specific questions, but for the most part, I think that the statement of purpose was able to be reused for all 7 of those programs with some minor edits. Late August, early September, I also started to ask people for letters of recommendation. With letters of rec, sometimes, professors get busy, PIs are so busy, and so even if they agree to the letter of rec, they might keep putting it off and off. By November, I only had 1 of my 3 people having submitted the letter of rec. You can do this if you want. This worked for me. I showed up at their offices with handwritten thank yous, and I just kind of dropped by and I was like, hey, I just wanted to drop this off to thank you in person for writing me this letter of rec. And then that was sitting on their desk, and literally like within 2 days, those letters of recs were submitted. So, that was something I wanted to do anyways, but I think it was also a good way to remind these people that, hey, like I need this letter submitted like in 2 weeks. So by late November, I had submitted all of my applications, and by mid-December, I started to hear back about interviews. I applied to 7 schools and I got 5 interviews, which would begin that following year in January. So after all of this process, I basically took a winter break. I didn't look at applications, I didn't look at the schools, I had my interviews, I had them marked on my calendar, but I didn't look at anything else until the new semester started. So early January is when I started preparing for interviews. I opened a Google Doc and I just wrote responses to anticipated questions. Some programs have a list of questions to prepare for. I know Emory's did. And so I kind of used that as a model for all of my interviews. I reviewed my research, I read over the publications I was a part of, and I tried to really understand the nuances of my research that maybe as an undergrad were overlooked. And also a very big piece of advice is to look into the faculty that are interviewing you, because a lot of times you will be given the list of like the 3-4 people that you'll be doing interviews with. Google them, look at a couple of their publications, just review their lab website, look at what they do. I think it's a very good sign to show that, hey, I've looked at your work, I'm interested in your work, and I want to learn more about it. In mid-January is when my interviews began. Some of these were online, others were in person, some were 1 round, others were 2 rounds. It really just depended on the program, how this timeline went. One thing I want to add about interviews as well is when they fly you out, like they pay for your flight, they pay for your food. And so I would say like the interviews are the most fun part. So generally there is a universal timeline for making grad school decisions, which tends to be April 15th. I basically came to my decision in mid-March. That was it. I was set and classes began in August. And so throughout that summer, I looked more into people that do research at Emory, what I could see myself doing, learning more about my interests, but also I kind of took the summer off. I didn't do any research. I let myself reset before going down this very long and difficult journey. All right, so thank you all for watching this. I really appreciated the chance to share with you my experiences, and I hope that the things that I've experienced and gone through were able to be helpful for you. If you guys are interested, I'd be happy to make videos focusing on what to expect at interviews, and then focusing on the statement of purpose and reading my statement of purpose. So just let me know and I'll be happy to make more content for you guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching and bye!